I'd like to think design exists so everybody can have access to everything in some shape or form. And there are so many like different microscopic audiences and edge cases around these days. It can be very hard for people to feel like they are a part of that movement. So I'd like to think design is there to make that all the more representative.
Hey, it's Ben. Welcome to Awkward Silences. On today's episode, we have Karl Randay, who is currently the Experience Director at 383 Group. Karl's got stops at Canvas, where he was the head of design. He's also a design mentor at design.org. He's someone who has worked with a bunch of different companies on a bunch of different design opportunities, not problems, opportunities. And so he's a perfect guest for us to talk about kind of the state of design today. We talk about a whole bunch of things in this conversation. We're going to talk about design templates. We're going to talk about AI and systems. We're going to talk about the beige-ification of design and how you, importantly, can make the case for design for today's business. And so the skills and the mindsets that you should be putting to work so that your company, your stakeholders, whoever it is that you work with are thinking about design in a way where you can still keep your craft, keep that rigor that made you fall in love with the discipline, and also keeps you in demand with whoever it is that you need to help. So here is Karl Randay of 383 Group. Enjoy. Karl Randay, welcome to Awkward Silences.
Epic. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy to get into this discussion. So many of our conversations lately have been focused on research, insights, and we're going to get to some of that. I am excited to talk about for many things, but one of them is that you are first and foremost I guess we're going to get a little bit about your background and how you started in social sciences, but you're a design thinker and a designer and a design leader. So I'm hoping that we are going to unpack how the various machinations and changes in the world look and take effect from your POV in the design and design consultancy space. So let's first start with, what is 383? What do you and your team typically do when you work with clients?
Anything and everything. No. So we are a digital innovation consultancy, but 383 has been around for 20 odd years now, and I've been here for about 12. And originally the business was set up just as a better way of doing design. Back in the day, there were 1,001 of these types of businesses. People were getting started in their back bedroom if they had a copy of Adobe Suite or whatever. And 383 came about by way of learning a lot of things from businesses that hadn't done it very well, and how we can try and solve the problems our clients were facing rather than just getting fixated on picking a Pantone shade in a particular font. So it's evolved today to be mostly centered around us going into relatively legacy organizations, like large businesses. We work with companies like Hilton and Jaguar and Glenmorangie, thinking about the way that they typically can't do certain things or don't have the in-house expertise. So what we tend to do is we've got a small unit of people who range from strategy to design to product. We parachute in like a skunkworks team. We protect the business so we can carry on as usual. And we tinker, we prod, we experiment, we do value proposition stuff, we do research, we build prototypes, prove that they work, prove that they don't work, and then we hand it over to a business and parachute out again at the end of the day. But sometimes our engagements are really long ones, sometimes they're really, really short, but it's incredibly varied and multi-sector. So it keeps us going.
Have you, that's really helpful. Have you found that they are, I'm going to use the word AI to just span automation, large language models, workflow, SaaS software, all the stuff that any company, certainly a company that might have been around for a minute or two, sees and says, hey, we need to do something about that. Do they often come in, and again, I don't want to speak ill of your clients, but do they have a sense of what they need, or do they knock on the door and say, hey, we know we need help. We don't exactly know how or where to start. What's your first foray, that first conversation with a client? Do they often know what they need, or what do you and your team do to figure that out?
Sometimes there's what I call a scale of certainty, where you'll get a client who'll come along and they just haven't got a clue at all. And they're literally just fear in their eyes, doubt, concern, come and help us figure out what this thing is. Sometimes they'll come along and they'll have a really, really strong idea of what they want, and they won't be dissuaded from that. And you just have to kind of go along and understand how you can adapt on the fly and validate as you go. Sometimes they'll come along and what they do want is potentially disruptive. So we have to help validate that and educate what that might look like. And certainly AI and tech features heavily, especially at the moment, the last 6 months, the amount of workshops where we've just, myself and the business founder, we've spent hours and hours and hours just talking about, well, what do you do right now? How can we help you get started in understanding where AI sits in your business, but also how can it be helpful? And a lot of that is, it's not this, it's that. And, people who don't really work with the AI day to day can kind of form a really weird misconception of what it does, what it doesn't do, how it's
I'm thinking about, I was scanning at 383's portfolio, and among many other companies, there's some spirits brands, and I'm thinking about, again, I don't know if actually any of the companies do this, but like chatbots are often, or automated agents are often one way that a company feels they can easily deploy AI. And I'm thinking some of the brands with whom you work, they have a very large and diverse range of products. I might be as a spirits drinker, use an AI agentic, like, hey, I want to have this sort of a feeling or this sort of a taste. I mention that because there's a design component and there's an interaction component and there's there's all the things that you and your team specialize in. Do you hear from brands that they recognize that their design needs to be, they know that their design, I assume, needs to be multimodal and omni-channel, but what are the specific design problems or opportunities that they mention? There's certainly business ones that we can get to. They find probably new streams of revenue, but you're a design thinker. You're helping build a performant, cohesive system around either a visual story. Walk us through what those sorts of questions. Again, I know that they'll vary client to client, but walk us through the design opportunities that you're working with them.
I guess a lot of what we do, because it's so broad when it comes to design, it invariably finds that point of confluence around people. We've had a couple of interesting projects over the last 10 years where there's been such a myriad of design challenges. So we don't have a system. We don't have a consistent way of doing things. We don't have a way of adopting or growing as a business. We don't understand what the future of our business looks like. We don't know how to use AI. That invariably we start at the people, not just outside the organization. We don't just think about the audiences that consume a product or a service. A lot of what we've ended up doing is thinking about the people inside that business who are trying to move it forwards. And that might be, for instance, if you work in healthcare, one particular client we had a fantastic opportunity to work with, were trying to raise awareness of how they helped the NHS. So for your American audience, the NHS is healthcare you don't have to pay for. It's completely broken, but we won't get into that. But invariably, it's a lot of it was not just how people can consume and be aware of how those services work, but it's also inside the business. You've got people in call centers who are answering telephone to incredibly stressed out individuals who are trying to solve very real life or death problems.
Sure.
And being able to deal with those stressed out customers or patients when you've just got screens and screens of data in front of you is a very real person problem. So what we do first and foremost is stop and think about, well, what is your awareness of the challenge you have as a business? What do you think your customers are having a problem with? And then we look at that from a 10,000 foot view and try and understand how we blend that stuff together. And this kind of like where research has been a really important fulcrum of the way that we work over the years, in that we're desperate to get businesses to solutions that we can test and we can validate, but built upon insight. Or more often than not, we either get a client who doesn't appreciate any form of research at all, and they just want to, lick the thing, stick it in the air, and you've just got to race towards what you think their target is. Or they've had consultancies come in, we're talking like the big consultants, and they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on research. And at the end of that process, someone's dropped a massive document on their desk and go, good luck reading that.
Yeah, here you go. I'll take my fee now.
Yeah. And the business is like, I don't know how to read this. I don't know what we've got to do first.
Sure.
We inherit a lot of those sorts of projects. So for us, research is very much about how do we talk to people and understand their challenges, while also keeping one eye on, do you know what, this is just a means to an end. The point of this research is for us to go, right, look at this maths. These are all the problems you've got. But because of that, this is where we think we need to focus first. And that tends to be the way that we operate. When we hit the ground, we'll do that whole sort of therapist couch thing inside and outside the business, which is, I guess, a lot of why my background has turned into understanding psychology. But then it's very much just about like validating stuff. So great. We hear what you think your challenges are. Let's go and make sure that the maths stacks up before we spend all this money.
Yeah.
Let's go figure out, actually, is that really a thing? And some of the, I mean, like I'll get into specifics in a bit about some of the projects we've had, but you hear about these problems and people are screaming and shouting about particular things. But when you look at the impact on their lives and the relationship with a particular brand, and it has such a low effect, it's so very easy to be walked down the wrong avenue based upon, I don't know, volume or
noise. And that's one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on, because you are working with a myriad of clients who, as you alluded to, have a different relationships with research, and they have a different maturity around user experience and design thinking. So let's stick for a moment on those customers or those clients that you said are maybe a little leery or a little like they've been burned, quote unquote, by research before. Because a lot of our listeners have maybe a product or a design or an engineering stakeholder that sort of has a sense of what they want to build, or maybe they've already built it and they're just coming to research to, sort of like, just tell me that my sense is right. So when you have a client walk through the door and they're maybe a little hesitant or they're confused even about doing the research, it sounds like you work with them, the client, on like, what are your long-term goals? What do you want to achieve in 10, 20, 30 years? And then your team pivots, it sounds like, to, okay, well, we need to go talk to your customers, your clients. How do you make that case for a company that might be a little hesitant or say, like, I don't actually think we need to do that? How do you make that case for them?
That's a challenge, and it's a great one. I think for us, it comes from a myriad of proof. So where we've done it before for other great brands, but at the same time, the trust is critical. So when we build a relationship with a new client, and we really want them to invest in a nominal amount of research, whereas it's about making it an easy yes for them. So those first initial bits of work that we will do will be relatively small and relatively low cost, but also require relatively low trust as well. So sometimes, for instance, we'll spend 24 to 48 hours with a client in a workshop environment, face-to-face, killing Post-it notes. And we'll do that as an investment piece because we believe in the process and we believe in the way that we're going to march that client towards understanding research and why it's challenging maybe their standpoint, but we don't want them to feel like there's a barrier to that, right? So do you know what, we believe so much in this, we'll give you this for free, or we'll spend a week with you and we'll show you the evidence and show you where you could go and what this potential look at things like the 3 horizons, for instance. And more often than not, that does a great job of making them realize actually the next step isn't a big leap, it's just another small one. And just by a lot of these mini milestone projects, we managed to get buy-in quite easily. And a lot of the time, we find the challenges inside these sorts of businesses come from high-end stakeholders, and the people who are trying to engage with us are people who drive specific teams, and they're trying to convert other people inside their own organization. So we might spend some time putting together a vision piece, validating that vision piece so we can demonstrate what we think that future looks like and how something might work. So it's that adage, fake it till you make it. So we'll go out, do some filming, do some interface work. I might spend a week in After Effects mocking something up so the executives and the stakeholders can really see and they can visualize and they can imagine what this thing is we're trying to develop. So it makes it much easier to accept what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve.
That value of trust is
it's critical.
Oh my gosh. And so many of the principal researchers or senior leaders I talk to and I want to ask this of you later, when they are developing their frontline ICs, they always stress, you have to be a salesperson, you have to persuade, and you have to really build the relationships with your stakeholders. It's not the case anymore. I don't know if it ever was, that just sort of saying, I'm a researcher, I'm here to do research, or I'm a designer, let's do some systems thinking. That's not going to be that light bulb moment for folks. Some stakeholders might see that as like, well, that's expense. I had a researcher at a very big big orgs say that research meant to their stakeholders slow, expensive, and launch blocking. Like all the things that research is not supposed to do. I mean, if it's going to uncover problems that might slow a launch, then that's what it needs to do. But I think it's so useful to hear you say that you take the clients through a workshop so that you're demonstrating your expertise. You're not just navel gazing. You're not just yourselves putting a finger in the air. You're bringing that science, like you said, those maths, the numbers, you're bringing that. And I think you also mentioned something else that's really both important and quite challenging for us as researchers and design thinkers is that we often are selling to or working with a stakeholder who then has to turn it around and sell it to and influence someone else. You alluded to earlier that sometimes the old way of consulting, or maybe some of the time now, is to like drop a big report, send you on your way. How do your team extend that tail? Do you put in like activation plans? Do you have roadmaps to make sure that the people you're serving can then make the changes or the improvements?
Eventually, yeah. Do you mind the big secret to a lot of this stuff is just collaboration and involvement.
Mm-hmm.
So especially around those workshops, initial research, concept development, mapping out where we want to go, it's a 50-50 process. So we don't call our clients, we call them partners because, and again, this is a bit of psychological trickery. A lot of the stuff that works really well for us is, I don't know, we've learned it from watching FBI shows or whatever, that sort of a lot of police interrogation, that kind of thing.
I want to be on your lunch and learns or your training
I can
sessions.
remember back in the day when I worked for a classic web design company back in the early 2000s, when you do 3 versions of a design. They take it home, they show their other halves, and then, there'd just be this public opinion of what should change and what should be changed.
Yeah.
The quickest way of defeating that is the quickest way of making everything else work that you've just mentioned as well. So getting internal buy-in, helping internal teams know how to carry these things forwards, is making sure they're a part of absolutely everything. So those workshops is very much about ensuring that they're contributing to these things and collaborating with it. So when we do research, when we interview people, they're in it. When we're synthesizing those findings and all the stuff that we're hearing from people, they're helping push it. Because more often than not, if a client is, or they feel like they're contributing to a thing and they're helping craft whatever it is you're making, they're less likely to tear it down, to be honest.
Oh, I bet they've got their investment. They're
100%.
seeing it. Yeah. They remember that person that they maybe were, they saw in a focus group or an interview, or But if you start from basics, right? If you end up from your first couple of engagements of trying to understand what those basic elements of the 3 horizons look like. So this is where we want to be now, next 6 months and 2 years, and they're helping build those. You're going to get to an apogee point where you can push that boat out to water, and they're so conversant with the stuff that you've done and where you're going, where they're going, that they can carry that momentum forwards inside the business while you're pivoting and looking at the next challenge. Because a lot of what we've done over the years is we find ourselves parachuting into a business, and it's very much like onto the deck of a boat and the boat's on fire. There are problems. There are some interesting clients that we've experienced over the years, especially in the automotive industry, that have had definitive challenges. And we've gone in to help them understand which of those fires to put out first, and then build a model around it and a strategy and a roadmap. Yes, sometimes there's physical, digital things that we're making. Sometimes it's just service design, but it's all centered around, you think this thing is on fire and it's more on fire than the rest of this stuff. Gosh.
Let's just validate that, stick it in an order, and then we'll put it out. Put all those fires out in that order. So if we're helping those teams understand what the map is or the direction for something, we can leave them to that while we focus on fire number 2. And more often than not, like a lot of what we do that works very well is that coaching system. Sometimes we're helping businesses hire their own design or their product teams. Sometimes we're just training them and helping them use tools in the way that we're used to, because we're used to just going in and hacking away. And that is the heart of the way that we work. It's very hacky, but it's fast and it's effective. And if they can roll those methodologies into the way that they do stuff, then it means we can focus on some of those really big growth areas, and that makes a significant difference.
Yeah. And I want to get to that scrappy, time sensitive, because that's another thing that we hear from a lot of our listeners, is that they want to deploy their methods, but their stakeholders have given them half or 1 week, or just much less time than they would. But before we get there, I wanted to ask you, you said you've talked about the 3 horizons. Are there other questions that you pose to stakeholders or clients or partners that really helps them get thinking? Like, what would you recommend for someone who's working with a stakeholder who maybe not doesn't know what they don't know, what are some questions that you and your team have found successful to ask them to find those opportunities from the business problems or the business cases?
I think it is the subtle art of asking simple questions and stupid questions as well, to be honest. I think when it comes to specific stakeholders, especially if you've got somebody inside a client's business who they might be in the middle, they might be near the top, whatever, they've got their own agenda, their own growth opportunities. A lot of what we want to do is listen to that stakeholder and understand where they want to go and what they want to do with the business and help them understand what the art of the compromise looks like. More often than not, it is just like that therapist couch job. You're listening to, why are we in the room with you? There's got to be a reason you've hired us to come and listen to the challenges that you've got. But like, where is the whole business going? You know, where you're trying to go overtly, but then how does that then boil down? So sometimes when we've been dealing with clients, there have been silo teams, and each team has a captain. So listening to each of those captains, making them feel heard, so that we can compare those agendas and see where they overlap, sometimes where they conflict. It essentially becomes an art of mediation and resolution a lot of the time.
Sure.
Those compromises, that's where progress comes in. But it's just listening to, where does person number one want to go? What do they want to do? They might be new in the business. They might want to look really great. What are the small things that we can do to help them achieve that? Or keeping one eye on, actually, what does business model growth look like for this organization? We are a very small team, but we tend to spread our skills across a range of different methods. So, you know, while we are designers first, we look at things like business model canvas and like other kind of structural, strategic methods, so that we can juggle a lot of plates and spin a lot of balls. Excuse the mixed metaphors, but more often than not, it's just listening, juggling, making sure that everybody's happy to a degree, but that, you know, if you've got three people in front of you and each one of them has conflicting agendas, it's getting it out there.
Yeah. So how do you, I'm envisioning, again, and I think you have an office and some of your team goes and meets in person, but for those who are hybrid or maybe fully remote, maybe it's a giant digital whiteboard or it's a huge doc with a bunch of the, you know, hits, misses, and wishes from each captain. You and your team come back after doing these workshops. You're looking at maybe dozens, maybe upwards of 100 or so opportunities. How do you prioritize? Walk us through that process, because then I want to know how that prioritization leads into the scrappy process that you found that helps you, you know, sort of learn on the fly, and then do you react and sort of change? So let's start with that prioritization process. What does that look like with you and your team? Because you said it's small. Typically, how many folks do you have working with you on one of these engagements?
So when we go in and do the initial consultancy and the workshops, there's maybe like three of us, and 383 operates very much from a strong core team. So as a business, there are like 20 plus core 383ers at any one time. And because of the range of things that we're doing, it's a little bit hub and spoke. So we have a very strong network of people that we're consistently leaning upon in the contractor and freelance universe who've been with us for years, so we can dial up or dial down certain specialisms. So whenever we go into any one business or any one situation to run a workshop, run a consultancy, inject designers or second people, it is very much like a game of top trumps. You've got that in sex, right? You play that game. So I've got a list of people in my team or in across the business, and we can understand based upon what that like initial triage consultancy that myself and the business owner will have run, what that initial need might look like. So who are the operatives we want to select, and how long we want that engagement to be. What we will then do once we've listened or we've run through that first engagement and we know what the core objectives are, we'll already have a very strong sense of what some of those foundational requirements might be. So let's say, you know, for sake of argument, a business comes in and they really need a strong single customer view. They've got really old, crappy CRM. There's a lot of like technical consultancy that might need to come first, making sure they're on board with something like Salesforce and what does the strategy that lives on top. So it's actually quite easy to figure out what the first few steps are. So defining Horizon 1 and a little bit Horizon 2 are actually quite simple. We don't also believe in like the classic idea of MVPs where you build something, test it and throw it in the bin. For us, much more about being super efficient, where we work with the client to map out what we think that future platform looks like, and we do it in such an agile fashion that we just like a many layered cake, just like build it up vertically. But for it to be stable, these are the groundwork elements that we need to focus on. So for us, the prioritization comes down to spending time to understand effort versus impact, right? And this is the same for a lot of businesses. What big things do we need to invest in now that will make it easier as time progresses to do certain stuff? Sometimes if it's customer focused, we need to understand what that looks like from an appetite point of view in terms of resolving some of those bigger frictions that we've heard. And we've got a proprietary scientific method that we've invented called friction mapping, which means we can actually go out and mathematically measure what friction looks like for a customer. So like if we know, for instance, we're dealing with an automotive client and they have a series of dealerships, if someone goes into that dealership and they experience a really bad problem trying to buy a car or what have you, we can measure that quite easily, but also compare it against everything else in the customer cycle. So we know some of those foundational things might be fixing that if we think that's root cause, and that kind of thing. Really, it's really understanding across that journey how you can track all those problems back to state number one.
I see. Yeah. So there might be along a journey a red, if we're using that as a color, for a negative or a negatively valenced moment. But then there's a severity. Again, my words, not yours. There's a severity, and that might be from 0 to 5. And if you've got a couple of 4s, you and your team might say, okay, that's where we really need to be. Because it's maybe if it's bad, but it's only an annoyance, a 1 or 2, that might not rise to the level of tackling for a 4 or 5. It sounds to me, and again, for the folks listening who are ICs, it sounds like your team wear a lot of hats. A designer on your team isn't just a designer. It sounds like they're doing mock-ups. They have to understand maybe some technical specifications of CRMs. Are there skills that in the last 3-4 years you have found are really helping your own teammates be, the designers of tomorrow? Because I want to talk a bit about your thoughts on design systems and how AI and large language models are supporting or maybe doing some of the design work. But let's start with your team and the skills that your designers really use to help deploy this scrappy method. Because you don't want to bump into a person who's like, well, I only do this. I only do Pantone, colors, or I only do modeling. That probably doesn't work on your team. So what are some of the skills that designers, broadly defined, use and deploy on your team to be scrappy, nimble, and multi-talented?
So we start if we're bringing something into 383, the core strength, and we talk about T-shaped people, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The core strength is always UX first, because if you can ensure somebody has that ability to think like a UXer, a lot of what comes with that is being able to think about people problems. So there's a great book. It's on, and I had some time to interview this guy with a piece I did a while ago. There's a John Yablonsky published this Laws of UX book, and a lot of this makes things like neuroscience and psychology really accessible to the designer. So when we get a UXer in, we make sure that first and foremost, they've got a shored up strength in understanding why they're doing things. So, if UX has been a discipline for years now, and sometimes we design things in a particular way because of habit or because the industry has always done it that way. You look at web browsers on a mobile device, the menu bar is always across the top.
Sure.
Ergonomically speaking, that's rubbish, right? Because your thumb's at the bottom and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of our designers, our UXs, we make sure that they're asking genuine human physiological questions at the start of these experiences. So why do things like Gestalt exist, for instance? Why do we appreciate the laws of proximity and all this other stuff and design hierarchy? It's first and foremost, that's what causes a designer to ask the right questions up front. And then a lot of where we spread out from that is making sure that people can articulate that and facilitate workshops with clients. So it very much goes from a UX that has a natural UI ability to then being very much a product person. So a lot of what we're doing with our teams is ensuring that agile thinking, that agile methodology is embedded in everybody, but it's learning by doing it. We like throwing people in at the deep end and being exposed to client problems. And again, like I said before, the sort of asking stupid questions is invariably how we learn.
And I imagine, that another trend, not just this year, but maybe more so in this year, because here in the States, and I'm sure in the EU, we've got a lot of budgets shifting and teams reorging and rifts happening. That's reductions in force. And a lot of UX practitioners are coming to the realization that they need to know a lot more about the business than maybe they thought they did. Again, they really thought that craft would continue me, craft would be my demonstration. And yes, we need to be rigorous folks who deploy a set of crafts to answer questions and help solve business problems. But it sounds like also for your team, that first series of questions, you're not just asking what's broken or where can we help, but you're probably thinking, how does it make the business better?
Yeah.
Is that another skill that you think, user experience professionals and maybe designers in particular need to get more fluent in? And what does that look like on your team? How do you make sure that your team is thinking about how their work connects to the long-term health of the business, broadly defined?
So you remember that meme that's gone back years, should designers code? The answer is,
yes.
Designers should business, to be perfectly honest. And there's so many articles that have come out in the last decade about design having a seat at the table and all of that malarkey. I think it's very much about don't ask, don't get. So for designers, they've really got to have that sense of commerciality, so understand the numbers. So we spend a lot of time understanding things like OKRs and KPIs, and with people out there like Jeff Gotelf, who has really eschewed the idea of OKRs for designers to help them become much more commercial. Access to how we can grow that sense of business acumen in a creative way is never been easier, to be perfectly honest. So between businesses like Strategizer, who do the BMC stuff, and Jeff's work, it's actually quite easy to expose and evolve the thinking of our teams, that they can see, even from a simplistic point of view, what some of those OKRs should be. So, why are we designing this thing? How will we know this has improved the business? What are some of the measurements we expect to see? Because invariably they're driving conversations, not just with engineers, where we've got to put things like tracking detail in, also then with like business managers and product managers on the client side, and that's their language. And if we want to be heard as designers, we've got to talk that language. I spent a lot of time in the office and in board meetings with like C-suite executives. I don't know if that term carries internationally, but we're talking like chief execs and CTOs and all the rest of it. If you talk like a designer and you start getting obsessed with things a designer would, they're just going to shut off.
Yeah.
You talk in their language and you can translate the things that are important because it affects real people, but you do it in their language, but it's expressed through design will help because this is where it'll get you. Then people will listen. And I think the art and the point of learning for people is, it's just that expression. It's learning that language, learning how to talk to people who don't want to use your language. That's what's really important.
And it doesn't minimize your craft. Like that's the thing that I'm struck by when I hear you talk about how you're scaling your team and hiring for your team and working with these clients. You're not doing the hard, rigorous, fun work of talking to users, designing systems, thinking about visual languages, thinking about colors. You're doing that work, but you might not deliver all that detail to an executive level stakeholder. And that doesn't mean that you're not still valued. If anything, it means you're being more strategic and savvy because you're thinking, okay, do they know what a hex code is? Do they really need to? No, they want to know that someone is being helped when they have a medical issue. It's made easier for them to book an appointment. And here's the thing we did to increase bookings by this percentage. Designers know numbers. You work with numbers all the time. Like anytime I'm in Figma, I'm blown away at the technical specification and the expertise that any card-carrying designer uses. So you have those skills. It's just like you said, switching that context, thinking about your audience. And I wonder, Karl, is that how designers need to be thinking about their own professional development? Because this is another question that a lot of designers face is, how do I go from sort of associate designer to senior designer? There might be a skills component, but it also sounds to me like there needs to be a business component. You need to be able to talk to more teams about the work you do. You need to advocate for design's impact. How did you make that rise from IC, as if we will, the individual contributor, to up through management and then, leading a team now? What were some of the things that helped you, either mindsets or skills specifically?
I think it's a mindset that then leads to a skill. And there are many, I don't think there's one true route for this. There's lots of different ways of doing it. And I've worked with designers who have chosen a path into or beyond IC, but what they're focused on is the craft and digging into that depth. If that's what they want, that's great. But I chose the path into management and kind of executive design leadership, just because that higher level is what interested me more. But it came from the habit of stepping back and asking questions of myself. And I've worked with so many people like those super craft ICs, and they're like moles. They will dig, and that was me. Before I had my head of design role, where you'll just dig so deep and you'll be laser focused on a tiny slice of something where, you're talking about button states and flexibility and all the rest of it. And like the people in the room around you, they're glazing over, they've switched up 7 seconds in. They don't need to know that level of detail. So if you want to, as a designer, if you really want that seat at the table, that means appreciating what everybody else around the same table is trying to do. They're not all business people. They're not all designers. Some of them are engineers. Some of them are product managers. Some of them are in HR, actually. The first big job I had with 383 was dealing with a lot of HR material at a client's organization where they'd merged two businesses together and the problems had stemmed from related issues. So you need to be able to talk all these different languages. But essentially it just comes from simplifying everything. Right. There's a bunch of principles that my previous design director taught me, and I've fixated on. One of them is simplify everything. Just dumb everything down. Just take it. It'd be really, really simple. And there's no surprises. Right. So as a designer, if you're really looking at where you want to go in your career, if you want to super specialize, then great. I think there's at the moment, because of things like AI, I think the whole idea of middle management seems to be the most at risk. But super specialists and executive design leaders, it still feels like that mega IC is a place to be. But you need to look at what skills you have and how you can extend those. How can you make yourself within a business context, even if you're laser focused on a specialist area, much more T-shaped, much more reliable and resourceful. And that's having things in your back pocket where you can be a bit of a product person. You can talk different languages. Maybe you've got a little bit of an engineering expertise in there as well that makes your, the onboarding of your work a bit easier and a bit more accessible. But yeah, multiple strings to the bow, I think, is a way of doing it. And what we've tried to do as an organization is reduce everything down into atomic components. So all of our services as an organization have consistent ingredients at the bottom. So if we're doing a piece of research, or we're doing a piece of product prototyping, or a piece of consultancy, we'll be made up of a number of different ingredients. And in each one of those ingredients is a core skill. And if you can map those against the people inside your organization, one, you can spot all the gaps that exist as a business, but two, you're also giving the people who work with you the opportunity to own some of those specialisms. And in a small organization like ours, that glass ceiling is really low. And, work conscious, we don't want that to be a deterrent for people wanting to stick around or even join us in the first place. So becoming a specialist, or owning a particular skill, or even introducing things to our organization is a big deal for us. But for us, it has to be systemized. So we have to be able to track it. We have to be, if someone wants to use that to grow and to become a senior, or to become a principal or an IC, we have to prove that adds value to them as an individual and to us as an organization.
I love how repeatable that is. I love that is accessible, and I love that it's still powerful. I think sometimes we think of frameworks. Well, many researchers and designers love a framework because it's got this, it seems really easy, but like you said, asking the simple question, or the 5 whys, or the 3 horizons, these sound very simple, but putting them into practice with a stakeholder, you get so much depth. All right, for the rest of our time, I want to shift now to some trends in design, because again, I love that you are not only thinking about professional development and growth for your own IC designers, you're helping designers at other companies, your partner customers, and you're helping other companies up-level their design. So you're bumping into, I'm sure, a lot of trends in design. And something that you and I talked about when we were preparing for this was the beige-ification of design. I'll be interested to see how the transcript reads that out. But what is that? Because you had alluded to design getting beiger and beiger around a specifically designed system. So on the one hand, you and your team are deploying some frameworks, you're liking some of these processes that help you organize thinking. But on the other hand, you're seeing maybe in the market some beige-ification. So talk us through what that is and what role, if any, does that design
So this has been around for a while, I think. So we all know what design patterns are, right? We commonly interact with things in a sense of familiarity. So, you pick up Facebook, you pick up Twitter, you pick up whatever, we know, login top right hand corner, menu down the bottom. Brilliant. That's great. So that really triggers fluency in the human brain, which makes things faster. I'm all for that. What we've seen happen over the past decade is a lot of these design patterns are just being picked up and run with, and maybe not challenged. Proof in fact, Apple, when they redesigned Safari a number of years ago to make all of the Chrome components at the bottom of the screen, people were up in arms, it's not at the top, blah, 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 blah. What they didn't realize was if we'd done this 20 years ago when mobile devices were first introduced, people would have known the ergonomics were much, much stronger.
Yes.
And invariably, what we have now is a set way of people appreciating there's a limited number of ways you can design certain things. Now, spin on a couple of years, people start to need to move faster into product. And that whole idea of product design became a much bigger thing, and being able to wireframe or explore ideas or even share the responsibility of designing things or even validating certain things with the rest of your team. And I think that's where style guides and kits and early design systems came from, so that we could take a set of easy to reduce and reuse components and just play with the layout behind the scenes. Now, when I was a design student back in the 90s, and we learned, I learned traditional typography, the maths of lettering and layout and all the rest of it. So my design education was very much like it's rooted in layout and grids and tinkering with things. And myself and some of my colleagues saw like the more recent cohort of design students just picking up these kits, not querying their typography or their margins, their padding, their layouts, but then just using it. So therefore missing a whole swathe of education or understanding that could really aid them as designers. Now, I see this creating this beige-ification, or at least it's starting the beige-ification, in the sense that and we've seen this, right? So these great patterns exist. You look at a designer's portfolio or a design agency website or a real estate company's website, that they are very, very similar, because we've accepted that's the way that you do it, and Z patterns, F patterns, and all that sort of stuff. And it's just prevalent these days. I think the big primer for this, and where it's going to become a potential issue, is where we get into the area of automation and AI. And there's a lot of designers running around, we've all heard it, worrying about the robots taking our jobs and doing all the work for us. And that is, to a degree, I think it's going to happen. I think there are businesses out there who will just need to move so quickly. They will invariably cut some corners and use the robots to do those sorts of layouts. But the blowback from that will be the further beige-ification of stuff, because things like AI and automated tools are, you get out what you put in, and invariably you're already feeding these robots on stuff that is very similar, these reducible patterns. And the human condition, the way that we think, it's not based upon constant similarity. We don't like things like symmetry. If you cut the human face down the middle, one side is not like the other.
Right.
Those little kind of wabi-sabi microscopic differences, those faults, that make the most difference and things more attractive. And I kind of see, like, as time goes on and designers worry about their jobs going, what will happen is that all of these different services that have been automated will invariably look the same. Very much like, you have a galaxy forming over time, its accretion disk just thins out and everything just becomes this little thin, tiny wedge. The same will happen with design. And I think at that point, people will look to the human craft and the things that we're doing physically as designers. And like with all trends, we'll have this great sine wave of 1 minute everyone's running towards automation, the next minute they're running towards handcraft and kind of scrappy. Like 1 minute it's really clean and minimal and there's no drop shadows. 3 years later, we've got the drop shadows back.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Backwards and forwards, right?
Yeah.
Forever.
Or Apple now has its liquid glass after eschewing all of its transparency, and now it's just everything's transparent. And
do you remember, right, when Mac OS 10 first got introduced and we had those gel buttons?
Oh,
it's that. It's again.
Oh man, it absolutely is. And I'm thinking about in the industrial design space, Johnny Ive, 20 years ago, like we'll just make it a slab of glass. There's only so much and we can do with a single, and I'm talking physical design. You know much more, but I'm just, there's only so much that you can design and iterate. And so the experience of picking it up, I think that's why we're seeing more companies go with light or foldables, that sort of delight experience. And I'm so happy that you brought up large language models, because they are trained on this increasingly beige-ified version of design. And so how then should designers start to think about using Figma's AI tool? Or what are some ways that you and your team are maybe shaving a day or two or an hour or two off of a design system while still retaining that level of curation and real POV and that eye toward an outstanding design?
Yeah.
How can we use this tech? Because I don't think it's going anywhere, at least initially.
No, and I think as designers, we need to be aware of its capabilities and where we can slot into our toolkit. But thinking of it as that, it's a tool. And I think there's two ways that we use AI quite heavily at 383. One of them is in how we explore ideas, and it helps us cover a lot of ground at the same time. But we use AI as a colleague that we can leapfrog and explore things with. And then again, it comes down to the subtle art of the prompt, right? So if we've got a load of ideas, if we've just had a conversation with a client and we've got a transcript and we've got a bunch of hunches of what we think some of those focus areas might be, we'll work with AI to explore and exhaust as many of those as possible. But once it's done that, we take it to the next step. So for me, AI is that great first draft of something where we just need to cover as much ground as possible. And some of those, it's like the art of the workshop. Go in a workshop with a client, even if it's just us humans, we have to allow people to come up with really stupid ideas, because that's where the freedom comes in, right?
Sure.
I want to see 1,000 post-it notes on the wall in a workshop, and there's got to be utter crap.
Right.
Language.
That's where the trust comes from. You need to be able to, me as a non-designer needs to be able to say, like, I think it should be this. I think this should be the button state, Karl. And you're like, well, Ben, that's not what that means.
100%, right? There needs to be no shame in this stuff, because in some of those stupid ideas, there is a kernel of strength. So with AI, if we're doing that to explore some of these ideas, and AI says, oh, it should be this, and we go, that's absolutely rubbish. But somewhere in the corner of that idea is a thing. But if we don't work together, it's like an extra arm, essentially. Years ago, when we used to do a piece of research or design work, we had the luxury of being able to bring in like 2 or 3 designers on one piece of project work. But to your point, these days, budgets are thin.
Sure.
Companies need to move faster and all the rest of it. So we can't invariably afford to put multiple people on it. So it helps you as a pilot have a digital copilot with you to exhaust some of those things. But you're in charge. It's up to you to make sure that you're crafting and extracting and synthesizing those ideas. The other side of things is our friction mapping process. So about 10 years ago, when we inherited one of these research projects from an incumbent client, who'd gone, oh, we did some work with insert anachronistic, consultancy here, and it cost us 250 grand. We need to do some more research, but I've got 6 weeks. Can you do it for us? So we built a process which is it's a heady mix of journey mapping, service blueprinting, jobs to be done, and a few other things along the way. But it allows us to hit the ground running with the business, ask stupid questions of customers and silos and internal stakeholders, and at the end of it, spit out an end-to-end journey map of what we think those customer and business problems are, but which ones are the ones to pay attention to. So again, like I said at the head of this meeting, sometimes there's a lot of noise when you hear about problems. Doesn't mean you should pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. So what we've developed is a method for the robots to come along and remove a lot of bias. So I've got loads of photographs from previous sessions we've done where we've sat in people's lounges, listening to them talk to us about their problems as customers. And the interviewer sat there, he's got his head on one side and he's getting absorbed into the emotion being given to him. But then that's coloured the work that researcher has then gone on to do. So what the AI does for us now is it absorbs all of our research notes, all of the transcripts, it removes the bias from it, but then it synthesizes all of that and it gives us back a sense of what it thinks some of the impact areas are and how to grade some of these frictions. We then go and mark its homework as humans. But what it has done is it's pretty much halved the length of time it takes to go out and do a piece of research. So what used to take 12 weeks like now takes 6 because of that. And it means, again, we can move faster. And the whole point of this methodology is to get to the point where we can start drawing grey boxes and colouring in between the lines and all that kind of stuff. So, AI speeds up our processes and allows us to really understand where we bring most of our expertise, but also at the same time, making sure that we've not left a stone unturned somewhere. It marks our homework, we mark its homework.
I love that. So many of the AI, the user researchers working on AI products, as well as the people who have sort of dived straight into AI, they generally tell me the same thing, which is when I ask them, like, okay, so what do we do? And they're like, you have to try it. You have to test it. You have to know what its limits are. You have to know what it's crap at doing. You have to know what it's quite good at doing, because your customers, your clients, your partners, your stakeholders, they're using it, and they might not be using it to the best effect. And they might be using it to say, like, well, I just used such and such to create a prototype. Like, don't freak out. Say, okay, well, here's why that actually isn't a prototype, or here's why this isn't going to work for our use case, or why don't you then give that to me? I think designers and UX professionals are going to have to do a lot more educating around their craft vis-a-vis AI. And so I love to hear that you and your team are diving straight in, understanding where it can help and where it can't. We know that there's going to be a lot of those systems. Would you make a prediction for us for the future of design? It's, a small question. We've got beige-ification, we've got automation, we've got, I'll say, legacy brands recognizing that today's, younger than you and I consumer really value authenticity, candor. They want that connection, but it's often through this screen that they're talking to their customers. Give us a sense of what you think is going to be the next question that clients ask you and partners come to you, let's say in 5 years. 383 Group's got you at the head of the thing, 5 years down the road. Let's say you've got a big, or a small customer coming through. What's their question going to be? What are the thing that's going to be keeping them up at night?
I see, like, a lot of what some of our clients are thinking about now is the small customer. So I think a lot of the businesses that we've worked for previously have been very much focused on enterprise level audience acquisition. So, if it's business to business, for instance, how do we get like very large orgs to sign on to our service? We are now seeing how do we win over the hearts and minds of the baker who works in tiny town?
Yeah.
How do we get the individuals on board? And again, to everything you've just said is a component part of that. So authenticity, agency, accessibility, all of that stuff is giving a voice and the ability for those individuals and those people on their own, whether they're a business or an edge case customer group, to really be able to utilize things and services. And I guess, I don't know, maybe that's a really positive outlook. I'd like to think design exists so everybody can have access to everything in some shape or form. Mm-hmm. And there are so many like different microscopic audiences and edge cases around these days. It can be very hard for people to feel like they are a part of that movement. So I'd like to think design is there to make that all the more representative.
Perfect way to end this. Karl, thank you so much for the time. 383group.com. Check out Karl's work. Karl, is there another resource that you would recommend for designers or UX professionals, or a customer that's like, or somebody who's listening is like, gosh, I need to learn more? Where can they go? Either a design resource.
I'm going to name drop John, because he was really helpful to me a couple of years ago when I interviewed him for a piece of work. So John Jablonski's Laws of UX, single most light touch resource for understanding the benefit of what design can do for humans.
Love it. Karl, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Ben.